Today's episode is very special because we have one of the leading pro-life voices, Seth Gruber, joining us today on the ground in DC ahead of the big March for Life event there in DC on Tuesday, January 24th. So he's going to give us a real vibe for what it's like there on the ground just days before what I think is going to be one of the biggest, or not one of the biggest, I think it's going to be the biggest March for Life event that we have seen in recent history, or really at all, because there is a resurgence happening. I think people are really understanding and feeling an attack on the sanctity of human life from many different facets all around us, not just abortion, but the trans agenda, all of the forced experimental shots on people over the past few years. And the list goes on and on. And I think people are really ready to accept the light and to accept the sanctity of human life. And I think that that's so beautiful and it's so wonderful. So we're going to talk to Seth about all of those things today and dive a little bit into how the big players like Margaret Sanger and Rockefeller were behind this movement, and how the big players today are still behind this movement and the depopulation agenda and things like that. There's so much to get to, so we're going to dive into things with Seth Gruber.
Where do we go from here? Because the battle has just begun. As eyes open, we continue to arm ourselves with the truth in all aspects of our lives, asking questions and relentlessly searching for answers, educating ourselves and forging a new path forward. Hear from real people faithfully pursuing freedom. This is Faithful Freedom with Teryn Gregson, presented by We The Patriots USA, a nonprofit 501c3 organization working to preserve and reclaim our God-given inalienable rights.
Seth, thank you so much for taking the time, just hours into being there in DC, to come on Faithful Freedom.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for your voice, Teryn.
Yeah, I think that I need to continue to make this a regular thing, because last year around this time we had Abby Johnson on, and I think that it was cool to have her perspective because she was exposed firsthand to the evils at play, by working for Planned Parenthood. But you come from kind of a bright side of the industry, with your mother working in a pregnancy clinic, helping these moms, coming alongside of them, and you've seen the magic that can be at play there.
Yeah. So I've actually been a pro-life activist since I was a fetus.
Yeah.
So I've been saving babies for a long, long time. Because I've been reliably informed, Teryn, by the follow the science tyrannical eugenicists that seem to govern us, that the body in her body is not her body. Right? The same Dr. Fauci who says, follow the science, you stupid Republican rubes. Take the quadruple jab that was tested in every case with aborted baby cell lines and that prevents infection and transmission. Never mind, actually, just kidding. He's the same one who says that babies in the womb are not babies and that he defends abortion through point of birth and funds the Joseph Mengele-like scalping of babies at the University of Pittsburgh that are grafted subcutaneously onto lab rats to create humanized mice to perform experiments to find solutions to staph infections. But he has the gall to tell you follow the science. So if these people are accurate, Teryn, I guess that there is only one body, and the pro-choicers were right when they said my body, my choice. So if that's true, then according to the law of transitive properties, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. And so if babies are part of their mother's body and they're not babies, they're actually just pregnancy tissue, Teryn, then every baby my mother saved as the executive director of a pregnancy resource center were babies that I saved because I was her body. And so I have been sassy since conception. So thank you for the intro.
I love that. And I love that you just lay it all on the line, because so many people have for years now ceded ground in this argument, and now here we are into a place where it's now taboo to say that you would like to help save unborn babies, to help prevent babies from being murdered. And I think that that is what happened. People wanted to tiptoe around talking about this issue,
Yeah.
and now here's where we are.
Yeah, well, I mean, even though we have to give credit to President Trump for overturning Roe versus Wade, because remember, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, Teryn, was a 5-4 decision. But then the court asked, do we go the whole way and fully overturn Roe v. Wade? That decision was, well, I'm sorry, they went 6-3 in Dobbs, and they went 5-4 as to whether to fully overturn Roe,
Mhm.
which means that Roe only got overturned because of all three Supreme Court justices, from that mean tweeting orange man that Russell Moore, Ned Stetzer, and Tim Keller and Andy Stanley and Rick Warren told us you were a bad Christian if you voted for. So you should never take anything they say with any credibility once again. So even though Trump has to be given credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, to your point, even he was recently saying that those pro-life Republicans are to blame for making too much of abortion because it was a political liability. He just said this the other day. He was saying, you guys got to stop with all the pro-life stuff that actually hurt us at the polls. So even the man that God seemingly used to overturn Roe v. Wade is still out there saying similar things. Like, this is not a first tier issue. We need to be more moderate on our pro-life views in order to win at the polls. But that's actually why we're in the position that we're in. We've been ceding ground, and we've been dealing downstream with issues that are in large part due to our apathy towards that abortion issue, because of the order of rights on which our republic was built. And if some human beings can be denied rights of personhood because they're inconvenient or unwanted, there's no limiting principle to that standard. And so we should not be surprised at the current state of our culture of death, because of our tolerance and apathy towards what I call, if you're a Christian, to what I call Satan's sacrament. So,
Absolutely. I mean, I think just anyone who is a Christian listening to this would know my stance on all of this, and the fact that really the entire Bible is a birth story, right? The entire Bible is a birth story, from Genesis, the birth of creation, Exodus, the birth of a nation, the birth of our Savior, all of it. And Satan is not only the father of lies, but the father of death. And so we're seeing it everywhere around us, and it's an undeniable spiritual war that we have going on here. And they're playing the long game in all of this. But I want to, before we kind of dive into the big picture,
way back.
yeah, before we dive into that, because I want people to be armed with that information. I think so many people don't know the historical roots like they should. I want to first get your perspective, now that you're there on the ground in DC, on how big of an event you think this is going to be, given, that Roe v. Wade was just overturned and people are starting to, I think, grow courage in this issue.
I may have to disappoint you, Teryn, to say that you might be a little more optimistic than me. I would like to think that this will be the largest March for Life in decades, and I sincerely hope you're right. I always want to be proven wrong when I'm the pessimist, but I have just been around this fight for too long, and I've seen too many people grow weary, and I also saw way too many people who call themselves pro-life treating Roe v. Wade as like some ultimate victory,
Yeah.
as if this was it. And I was like, what are you talking about? I celebrated it, and I had a cocktail or two as well. Okay. Like, I'm not saying I didn't celebrate it. I'm saying it's actually the beginning of the pro-life movement in a very real way.
Mhm.
Through judicial tyranny, we were denied the right to work out that debate at the state legislative level. We the people governing ourselves.
Mhm.
Now, I don't even believe we need an amendment to ban abortion, although it may require that one day. Really, everything that is needed to protect the unborn is already in the Constitution. Conversation for another time, but we may need an amendment eventually to actually ban it. But this is the beginning of the pro-life movement. Are you kidding me? Now states can ban abortion. We need to work through that legislative process while we demand a full abolition of abortion at the federal level. And so I thought so many people were way too excited. Like they were like, we did it. I'm like, well, I hope you're not like going to stop coming to the March for Life. I hope you're not going to like stop your activism, because this is actually the beginning. Let's celebrate. Let's go get a drink. But now let's go. It's time to giddy up. And so I've seen a lot of people settling. And
Mhm.
so I have a sneaking pessimistic assumption that the turnout won't be as great as we want on Friday. But I hope I'm wrong, and I hope you're right. But what we do know is this: we know that the other side is not slowing down one little bit. They are like a wounded lion, who's all the more dangerous because they sense their ending. And if we're going to strike the final blows against the Leviathan, it's going to require punching back 3 times as hard and a renewed sense of commitment, the likes of which we haven't seen since the mid 70s in the pro-life movement, because the other side ain't slowing down at all. I mean, for goodness gracious, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife last year made a $275 million single donation to Planned Parenthood, the largest single gift Planned Parenthood has ever received in that organization's history. And in case your listeners don't know this, Teryn, Planned Parenthood, many people don't know this, Planned Parenthood is the largest, most profitable, and best funded nonprofit in world history. Many people don't know this. So we're up against a Leviathan, the likes of which is hard to truly comprehend. And now the billionaire eugenicists and all of their serviles are continuing to pour out of the woodwork to pour and funnel more funds into organizations like Planned Parenthood and the National Organization for Women and kind of the whole abortion industrial complex, because their core sacrament is starting to crumble. And so if we don't wake up to the reality that this is the beginning of the pro-life movement in a very real way, I fear that this battle will increase another 50 years.
Yeah, I think that you're very right on that. And I hope that people take away from this a need of urgency and a need to not back down. Don't stop talking about it. Keep normalizing the fact that it's okay to want to save babies. Like, that's not a bad thing. People should continue to normalize that.
Let's prove my point. Let's prove how serious this battle is really quick.
Sure.
What did they do when Roe v. Wade got overturned? Now, listen, they didn't go full BLM Antifa, but they started to.
Yeah, they did.
I mean, over 100 pro-life ministries were either burnt to the ground, firebombed, or physically vandalized. That vandalizing was like the
yes.
the most restraint they exercised. So if they didn't burn down pregnancy centers, and by the way, most people don't know that over 100 pro-life ministries physically attacked. But according to Merrick Garland, Teryn, I'm the domestic terrorist because I spoke at a school board meeting and I raised my voice a little bit at the school board members. And I said, you demonic Alfred Kinsey inspired pornographic demons pushing Alfred Kinsey porn onto elementary schools and junior hires. We're going to primary every single one of you. And I raised my voice a little bit. And then Merrick Garland opens up a domestic terrorism investigation from the Department of Homeland Security into those mama bears and papa bears speaking at school board meetings. Ridiculous, but nothing to say about the burning down of pregnancy centers and pro-life ministries. So,
and that continued too when they had the FBI going after more and more.
I was about to say that too. Yeah. And if they exercise restraint, Teryn, they just wrote in red blood colored spray paint on the walls of pregnancy centers, if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. That sounds like far more of a domestic terrorism threat, Teryn, to me, than when I raised my voice at the pornographic school board members in Thousand Oaks, California. Are you kidding me? And then, of course, the FBI arrested over 10 or 11 pro-lifers last fall, one of whom, Mark Hoke, who I have coming on the podcast soon, who has like 8 or 9 kids. And the FBI show up with 20 or 30 armed agents, rifles drawn, banging down on his door while his wife is holding their newborn and trying to homeschool the kids. And there's a story behind that. It's ridiculous and disgusting what they're doing. Look how they respond. They had a group named Jane's Revenge and Ruth Sent Us. Jane's Revenge, referring to Jane Doe, right, of Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade. By the way, referring to Norman McCorvey, who became pro-life and never had an abortion. And then Ruth Sent Us, referring to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, saying like she sent us. I mean, so you start seeing how the spirit of the age and his acolytes respond when Roe v. Wade gets overturned. And it's not even illegal at the federal level. And by the way, they're still shipping abortion pills into pro-life states like South Dakota and Missouri, where abortion's illegal. They're still shipping abortion pills from India through pill mill websites into the mailboxes of women in pro-life states who are still killing their children, despite the fact that abortion is illegal in those pro-life states. So this was a major victory, but it was only sort of a minor bump in the road to the total abolition of abortion that we're seeking, and yet they still lost their ever-loving minds. And so if they'll come for those protecting the unborn, then you need to wake up, pro-lifer, conservative, Christian, to recognize that if you don't start treating this as the linchpin of secular liberalism, then by the time you do wake up to it, it will be too late.
Oh yeah, and we're seeing that it might be too late in the fact that just what was that, last week or 2 weeks ago, where lawmakers are vehemently just shutting down, the Born Alive bill. They want to kill babies after they have not successfully been aborted.
Yeah, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act.
Yeah.
You probably know this, Teryn, but to just remind your listeners, when they proposed that in 2019, Ben Sasse, Nebraska, okay, he brought it back. Now, remember, under Bush, we had the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. And it was supposed to accomplish what this new one aims to, but Bush's legislation didn't have any teeth. It didn't have real criminal consequences for abortionists who don't care for the life of a baby abortion survivor or who actively kill them. Ben Sasse's had teeth. The point is this: the Republicans brought that back up for a vote over 70 different times between 2019 and 2020. And Pelosi, that I call her the grandmother of the abortion industry, and all of the Democrats, they vetoed that thing over 70 or 80 times. So wake up, guys. They're pushing fourth trimester abortions now. And Peter Singer, interestingly enough, Teryn, Peter Singer, the philosopher at Princeton University who has defended infanticide up to 1 year old after birth. Okay, so we're talking about a true demon. He has this interesting line. He actually admits, he's, when the left sometimes says the quiet part out loud, Teryn, where they admit they're more demonically deeply held premises that you're not supposed to say out loud. Well, thank you, Peter Singer, for telling us what all the Democrats in Congress believe. Here's what he said once in one of his books. He said, the liberal search for a morally crucial dividing line between the newborn baby and the fetus has failed to yield any event or stage of development which can bear the weight of separating those with a right to life from those who lack such a right. In other words, if I summarize that, what he's saying is, yeah, all of us liberals, we've been trying to find like a really clear, obvious dividing line that makes it justifiable to kill children in the womb, but not outside the womb. And none of us can really find a line that makes sense. So guys, yes, if you push abortion, because there's no fetus fairy that sprinkles magical personhood conferring fairy dust, there's no magical line. If some humans can be denied rights of personhood, there's no limiting principle to that. So you should not be surprised that they're now shooting down legislation to protect infants who survive botched abortions. And the same party is on board with euthanasia and doctor-assisted suicide.
Yep.
Shocker.
Yep. I was just going to bring up that fact that, now we're starting to see a not so quiet push for that anymore. We're seeing, the transgender movement taking hold, which is really, stripping our nation's youth from being able to reproduce, which I think ties together so well.
Goes back a long way, Teryn. The overpopulation.
Then that's what I want to do. I want to go
the neo-Malthusians.
Take us back, because I think that so many pro-life Christians aren't even armed with the knowledge of how deep this goes, how interconnected this is with big industry and the elites of this country's history.
Oh boy. Yeah, you said you wanted to keep this to 30 minutes.
I know. I do want to keep this.
We'll
try to keep it. Give us the brief and take us from there to how Planned Parenthood. I want people to really understand how deep they are embedded with the sex education programs. And
oh my gosh, you're asking for like
I am asking for a lot. Just give us a brief overview.
You just had me back on, okay, Teryn. Well, I'll refer people to a message I gave that I felt was my magnum opus, because I felt like the Lord just put me in the palm of His hand, and it wasn't me speaking. But I gave a message just called the White Rose Resistance, or I think we might have called it the Spirit of Lot or the Spirit of Gideon, at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. My earthly hero, Pastor Jack Hibbs, on November 13th, 2 months ago. It has over 100,000 views now on Pastor Jack Hibbs' YouTube channel, because my channel's a joke. I'm just a humble dude nobody knows about. But Jack is like, I say, is the pastor that America needs but doesn't deserve, kind of like Batman. And so he let me preach for an hour and 20 minutes. And I gave basically the entire history of the secular moral revolution and their pontiffs of the religion of humanism, who were more dogmatic for their religion in the public square than the people of God were for pure and undefiled religion. Basically explaining the spirit of Margaret Sanger and how we got here at this moment in the culture war in what was 2022, 2 months ago. So I refer you to that message on my YouTube channel or Pastor Jack Hibbs' YouTube channel. But what people need to understand is that Margaret Sanger was not like isolated or detached from the larger Marxist, secular humanistic revolutionaries and their utopian pipe dreams. She was not detached from that movement. She was one of the architects, for goodness sake. So this is, by the way, this is why I can't stand progressive pro-lifers. And I know people get mad at me when I go after there's a few leftist progressive progressive anti-abortion uprising, and I'm grateful for some of the work they do, but there's some progressive leftist pro-life advocates, and it makes me want to tear my hair out, because I'm like, you've chosen to isolate the pro-life issue, but you're still supporting all of the other let's call them branches off of the trunk of humanism. You're still you're still watering all of those other branches from the trunk of humanism, but you've chosen to try to hack at the branch of abortion, and it makes me want to tear my hair out, because it's like you're completely missing the underlying cultural and spiritual warfare that's been happening for decades, and how these people are all on the same team. There's a reason, Teryn, why the LGBTQ LMNOP movement is always in bed with Planned Parenthood and the abortion movement, because they're the same movement. Gosh dang it, wake up, people. They're the same movement. They're not different. And the same underlying ideology and worldview animates both. And that's an episode for another time as well. So Margaret Sanger was a true revolutionary, okay? And she got radicalized by the communists and socialists in the early 1900s in New York. She was part of the New York labor movement, which was a socialist movement in New York. Anyways, she starts propagating and writing sexual liberation content and pushing birth control. And she gets indicted on 3 counts for breaking the Comstock laws in New York City. True conservative policymaking that allowed the Postal Service to go into the mail and remove sexually lewd, titillating material to keep a healthy social fabric and culture that doesn't addict people to their most base human animalistic desires. And so rather than getting arrested, guys, this is the beginning of the patron saint of feminism. She flees to England, ships her kids off to be raised by someone else, and has her socialist friends in the New York labor movement forge her a passport. She goes to England for a year and a half, and she meets the Neo-Malthusians. And she gets involved in the Neo-Malthusian movement in England, which refers to Thomas Malthus. Who was Thomas Malthus? Well, he was the Anthony Fauci of the 18th century. He was just following the science of his day. And the science then said some people are fit and some people are unfit. So the unfit people should have no kids, and the fit people should have more kids, and we get to decide who's good and who's bad, who's fit and who's unfit. And the overpopulation theories, right, of like Bill Gates today and George Soros and Klaus Schwab, or the Rockefellers, the Fords, and the Carnegies of the early 1900s, that goes back to Thomas Malthus, who believed that food production can't keep up with population growth, with the inevitable result being massive starvation. So we get to decide who lives and who dies. So this idea of we're reaching a population bomb, that goes back to Thomas Malthus, okay? And then you had Paul Ehrlich write the Population Bomb book in 1963. Paul Ehrlich sat on the board of Planned Parenthood. And Bill Gates' father was one of the board members of Planned Parenthood many years ago, too. Are you seeing now all these people are on the same team? And then she meets Havelock Ellis, who was the Alfred Kinsey of England. So and I'm tying together now your question, because you brought up the overpopulation Malthusianism and the sex ed, the obsession with pushing pornographic sex ed. Here is where they start to coalesce for the patron saint of feminism. While her 18 months in England, she sleeps her way up the levers of power. A lot of people don't know the singer. So she's cheating on her husband while someone else is raising her kids. And she shares the bed with H.G. Wells, and she shares a bed with Havelock Ellis, who wrote over 50 books on every lewd form of sexually titillating experimental material. He himself was impotent, so he was always trying to find new ways to get excited. And he becomes one of Margaret Sanger's biggest political and, I guess, sexual influences. Havelock Ellis had a mentor named Francis Galton. Francis Galton, ready, is the father of the modern eugenics movement. Eugenics means good in birth. So some people are good in birth, Teryn, and some people are bad in birth. Right? And we as the patron saints, or we as the high priests of secular humanism, we get to decide which traits or genes should be increased and which should be discouraged. And he coins the term eugenics. He coins the term. Francis Galton's half-cousin, ready, guys? Francis Galton's half-cousin was Charles freaking Darwin. So there you go. Survival of the fittest, right?
Yep.
Darwinism, one of the most deadly religions and ideologies of the last several hundred years, whose half-cousin is Francis Galton, who modernizes the eugenics movement because Darwinism naturally leads into eugenics, who mentors Havelock Ellis, who is the biggest sexual and political influence on the life of Margaret Sanger. And Havelock Ellis and Margaret Sanger write letters for the next 2 decades after she goes back to New York and opens up her illegal birth control clinic in the Brown section of New York, an area heavily populated with Jews, Slavs, and Italians and Blacks. and those with the genes that she deemed unfit to reproduce. She starts the American Birth Control League, later renamed Planned Parenthood. She launches the Negro Project, and she gets Black charismatic leaders to propagate birth control in Black enclaves, so the Black people she's targeting won't be suspicious of her deeper eugenic aims, because it's being run by people who look like them. And I could give you quotes that prove that, by the way, that's not just me saying that they said that. And so there you go. That's a little bit of sort of the beginnings of a lot of this. And we're now sort of reaping the consequences of our apathy on these issues for so many years. We need more G.K. Chestertons. We need more Francis Schaeffers. And we need more C.S. Lewis's. G.K. Chesterton, and here's my final thought to your question, Teryn. G.K. Chesterton is credited as one of the only major public figures during Sanger's Genesis who saw it all. The Bible refers to the sons of Issachar. Do you remember that, Teryn? The men who understood the times and knew what Israel ought to do, right? Hosea 4:6 says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." And so G.K. Chesterton understood the times. I call him the first lib-triggering troll before Reagan and before Trump. And he would write in 1920, 1 year before Sanger launched the American Birth Control League, later renamed Planned Parenthood. He would write in 1920 in a newspaper in England, proving his prescience. And he would say, "We are not so very far off from even the sacrifice of babies, if not to a crocodile, at least to a creed."
Wow.
He would write that 1 year before the American Birth Control League would actually get started. He saw it all.
Yeah.
He understood that when you detach human dignity and rights from simply being human, back to what I said to you at the top of the show, there's no limiting principle. And he saw where this was going. And by the way, did you know Planned Parenthood in its genesis did not perform or support abortions? I will email you after this, Teryn. I will email you to share with your listeners scans I have of an International Planned Parenthood Federation booklet produced by Planned Parenthood in 1963, I believe. And they say in the booklet, get ready for this, quote, "Abortion ends the life of a baby after it has already begun, and it is dangerous to your life and health." Those are the two things Planned Parenthood is not allowed to say today. What are their two biggest talking points? One, it's not a baby or a person. Secondly, they actually say abortion is safer for women than childbirth. So they say that it's not dangerous
well, they call it
to your life or health
healthcare
at all. Yeah. And they were admitting in 1963, Teryn, that it ends the life of a baby after it has already begun, and it is dangerous to your life and health. The reason why I added that little bit was because even Planned Parenthood early on did not support, defend, or perform abortions. And yet Chesterton would see 1 year before the American Birth Control League was launched, this is going to end in child sacrifice.
Wow. How prophetic of him. And I think that too, people can see the correlation in everything that you're saying there with how people that were quote unquote the minds of the time, I say that loosely, wanted to play God. And that's what we're seeing with, so many people like Klaus Schwab and all of those people. I do want to touch on one thing before we let you guys go too, because I think that this is such a pivotal quote for anyone listening, especially if you have daughters, if you have children that, that are either in the school system or maybe they're in college and are a product of the school system. You have been quoted to say that sex ed is their sales funnel, abortion is their product, and your daughters are their prospects. And I think that is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, like I said, Teryn, I'm happy to come back on and do a whole episode on that if you'd like. But I'll tie it together for your listeners again. Mary Calderon, in 1964, was Planned Parenthood's medical director. Mary Calderon leaves her position as Planned Parenthood's medical director, and she starts the Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States, or SECUS, with seed money from Hugh Hefner. Okay. And later with a board member named Wardell Pomeroy. Go Google that if you want to throw up, guys. Wardell. Wardell Pomeroy Wardell Pomeroy, as the board member for SIECUS, had also been the executive director of the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University, which is still there today. And last fall, Indiana University erected a new statue to Alfred Kinsey. Alfred Kinsey, a demonically pornographic, addicted pedophile, who wrote his book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and was used as the book to argue that basically all men in America were cheating on their wives. Most men experimented with homosexual sex. And he interviewed pedophiles in prison to get his data, Teryn. And in a table 34, table 6, I might have forgotten the table. It's a very infamous table. In his book, he documents the rape of children between 12 months old and 6, 7 years old, whose orgasms were timed with a stopwatch over a 24-hour period. Now, Teryn, you have to ask, how did he get that data?
Yeah.
He interviewed pedophiles in prison. And then he argued that that was the normal sexual behavior of the normal American male. Okay, this is how Alfred Kinsey gets his start, right? So and there's some demonic sides that we can talk about in another episode. This guy was demonic. He starts the Kinsey Institute, enough. Right? Is the Kinsey Institute is still there. And then of course you had Judith. Oh my gosh, Reisman, who passed a couple years ago, who I never got to meet. Judith Reisman, who spends her entire life building the Reisman Institute to debunk the legacy and data-centric reputation of Alfred Kinsey's work and his life. So you got the executive director of the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University as a board member of SIECUS, started by Planned Parenthood's former medical director. And Wardell Pomeroy, in a 1980 interview with Time magazine, was described as part of the pro-incest lobby. And in that interview with Time magazine in 1980, so you guys can go Reuters, Washington Post, Pinocchio, fact check me. He says, incest between children and adults may sometimes be beneficial, end quote. So you got an incest pedophile as the board member for the organization that today is at the helm of writing, printing, distributing, and selling the very sex ed, right, Teryn? We're just following the science. It's just a scientific-centric approach. The very sex ed that brought all the mama bears and papa bears to school board meetings in the last 2 years, which led Merrick Garland to label us domestic terrorists. That's just the surface of the sexual obsession of Marxist communist revolutionaries, of which Margaret Sanger was an architect, because she saw what none of the other early revolutionaries of her time saw. She saw how sex could be used as the key to unlock the revolution, meaning she understood that the sexual revolution had to come before the cultural revolution, because in the early 1900s, we had a much more healthy social fabric in America, didn't we, Teryn? People were participating in more of what is called self-government, and they had virtue. And even if they weren't a born-again Christian, they were functioning off of a morality that they were borrowing from the Judeo-Christian worldview and heritage. That was a healthy social fabric. So Sanger understood, as Kinsey would, as Havelock Ellis would, okay, as all of these people would, that to usher in the revolution, you had to break down sexual and societal mores, standards, right? What do we say about liberty? Liberty is not the freedom to do whatever you want. It's the freedom to do as you ought. Or liberty are the wise restraints that make men free, right? The professional piano player can only play so freely because he's mastered his guardrails and standards. The same thing is true of politics and morality. So if we can break those down and titillate the masses so that people are reduced to their most animalistic cravings and appetites, then they won't be able to govern themselves. And they'll be a sucker for the first would-be tyrant and his utopian promises that rises amongst us. As Lincoln once said, or as Reagan once said, if tyranny ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism. And as Lincoln once said, if America ever dies, it will die by suicide. For as a country of free men, we must live for all eternity or die by suicide, because we, the people, are the sovereign. So if we're not governing ourselves, we're abdicating that dominion to those who are more zealous for evil than we as Christians or patriots have been for good. That's why we're in the predicament that we're in. But that's a little bit of how we got here. And we should end with this. we need to recognize we're dealing with an alternative religion, not an
Yes.
alternative political vision. And the religion of humanism took more lives in the 20th century alone than all of human history before it combined.
I love that you say that, and that's a great way to end it. And it's a great tidbit for people who are defending their faith and defending the unborn, because so many people on the other side like to throw at us the fact that God and religion has caused so much war and so much death over the years. And how could you want to defend that? And I think that you gave a perfect counter argument and
Most
factual one
people
at
who
that.
hate Christianity would not want to live in a world without it.
I 100% agree with that. And I love this discussion. You did a great job of breaking it all down and smushing it together in about 35 minutes here. But, there's so many other topics we can discuss. And another one that I would like to have you on at some point too is to dive further into the birth control tool that they used and the dangers that are behind that so many people don't know about.
I just got contacted by a writer for PolitiFact, messaged me privately on Instagram 2 days ago, Teryn, saying, we're fact checking your recent Instagram post that claimed that the increased and available use of contraception leads to more unplanned pregnancies, which increases the abortion rate. And we can't find any reputable sources that back that up. So we're wondering how you came to that conclusion. And of course, I didn't respond to them because PolitiFact is the same group that will say abortion is healthcare. Men can become women. And when you get quadruple jabbed with a dead baby aborted vaccine, that you're super protected. So, but the point is this, that's a conversation that they've never wanted to have because they've so successfully indoctrinated even pro-life Christians into believing that birth control and contraception is the best thing since sliced bread. Anyways.
Yes, and it all is tied to the sexual revolution and everything. So, Seth, thank you so much for your time. We're all going to be watching and participating in March for Life in any way that we can, and I encourage everyone to be a loud voice over the next couple weeks. Do not be ashamed to want to support babies. It's a wonderful thing, and so
Amen.
Thanks, Seth. Tell people you've got a podcast, a website. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you, Teryn. Yeah, I'm the CEO and founder of the White Rose Resistance, a new pro-life nonprofit that I feel is like the culmination of 10 years of speaking and activism. And actually, it wasn't an organization I was planning on launching. I wasn't like chomping at the bit to become a CEO. And so I think it's the result of providence, and it's a story that needs to be told in America at this late hour in the culture war. So you can go to thewhiterose.life, www.thewhiterose.life. You can find the White Rose Resistance on Instagram and Facebook as well. My Facebook and Instagram is Seth Gruber, or Instagram is Seth Gruber Official, and you have to type in the whole thing, or I don't show up. Seth Gruber Official, or I don't show up. At 25,000 followers, they made it very difficult. And I'm shadow banned on TikTok, so good luck finding me on there as well. My website is sethgruber.com. We're doing 40 events between January and May. I'm on a national tour right now for the White Rose Resistance National Life Tour in 15 different churches. And we're launching a university speaking tour this spring called Adolf Who? Margaret Sanger's Body Count. So if you want to get involved with the White Rose Resistance, check out our website. And my podcast is Unaborted with Seth Gruber, because we're all unaborted. Thank you, Teryn.
Thanks, Seth.